1 in 10 medical students now fails USMLE Step 1. Step 1 was changed to pass-fail in 2022 to reduce stress and burnout amongst med students, but medicine didn't suddenly become less stressful, less competitive. The pressure didn't disappear. It just shifted. A few years ago, I shared my concerns about making Step 1 pass-fail, not because I was against change, but because I was skeptical that it would address the core issues it ostensibly set out to solve. Now that the first wave of students trained under this new pass-fail system is moving through the match, I want to take a closer look at what actually changed after Step 1 becoming pass-fail, who felt it the most, the new pressures that med students are facing, and what it means for staying competitive for residency. Before Step 1 went pass-fail in 2022, it was a single high-stakes exam taken between second and third year. It tested foundational medical knowledge, but more importantly, it functioned as a screening tool. A higher Step 1 score didn't only mean you passed, it shaped which specialties you could realistically pursue, which programs would consider your application, and how early and clearly you could gauge competitiveness. That made Step 1 a sorting tool, not the root cause of burnout. Residency programs face overwhelming application volume. They need fast, standardized filters just to function. Step 1 filled that role for decades. So when critics argued that too much weight was being placed on a single test, the logic behind pass-fail seemed straightforward. Students were under intense pressure, burnout and anxiety were increasing, and removing numeric scores was supposed to help. Many people predicted the same thing at the time, that pressure wouldn't disappear, it would shift to Step 2 CK, research, and other signals programs could still use to scale. In some cases, anxiety could actually increase because there would be less margin for error. After all, there'd be no backup score, meaning if you messed up Step 1 in the past, you could make it up on Step 2 CK. But now, if you messed up Step 2 CK, that was set in stone with no opportunity for redemption, and a true holistic review still wouldn't materialize because programs would remain overwhelmed. Let's look at what actually happened. Overall, pass rates dropped by about 5 to 7 percentage points, with a larger decline among DO students. This doesn't prove causation, but it does require explanation. Before pass-fail, USMD students had pass rates around 95 to 97%. By 2023 and 2024, that dropped to roughly 89 to 91%. That means about 1 in 10 MD students now fail Step 1, compared to roughly 1 in 20 before. For DO students, the decline was steeper. Pass rates fell from the mid-90s into the mid to high 80s, a drop of about 6 to 8 percentage points. So what changed? Here's the key mechanism. When an exam feels less impactful, preparation becomes more variable. Some students still over-prepare, others pull back, and that variability increases the risk of failure at the margins. Removing the incentive to excel also removed a buffer against failure. But what's worse is that the stress didn't disappear. Recent studies looking at students approaching Step 1 in the pass-fail era still show high levels of anxiety and poor sleep leading up to the exam. Even without a numeric score, Step 1 remains a major psychological stressor. So the experience didn't become calm or low pressure, it just changed shape. There were 2 major pressure shifts. The first is the most obvious. Step 2 CK has become the primary numeric test score differentiator in residency selection. Scores didn't suddenly rise faster after 2022, they were already trending upward. What changed is how heavily programs depended on them. Plus, the timing of Step 2 didn't change. Step 2 CK is still taken during clinical rotations, overlapping with long work hours, evaluations, and residency applications. That concentrates more pressure into a single exam. But here's an important piece that often gets missed. When Step 1 became pass-fail, many students reallocated their time. Some pulled back on Step 1 prep and spent more time on things they believed would matter more now, like research and extracurriculars, which we'll get to shortly. For some students, that shift meant less consistent Step 1 preparation, increasing the risk of failing at the margins. At the same time, residency programs didn't stop needing filters. They still have to sift through thousands of applications. Removing one numeric metric doesn't eliminate the need for sorting. It meant programs leaned more heavily on the remaining ones. Now, there's more pressure on a single exam since there's no Step 1 score to offset a weak Step 2 performance. There are fewer opportunities to recover and more downstream consequences from one bad outcome. When pressure concentrates like this, consistency becomes critical. During medical school and exam prep, it's easy to run on autopilot and ignore things like sleep, energy, or focus, but when there's less margin for error, those issues don't stay in the background. They directly affect how you perform over long study days and high-stakes exams. Back when I was in residency, I didn't have access to health metrics as we do now. So shout out to Merrick Health for sponsoring this video. Sponsors help me continue giving free content and resources to pre-meds, med students, and residents, and I only work with sponsors that I stand by myself. I heard great things about Merrick Health and wasn't disappointed when I tried them myself. As with anything, the data show you what's actually going on. I had no idea my testosterone levels were trending down until Merrick Health helped me run comprehensive labs that went far beyond standard primary care testing. It had been hovering around 600 to 700 nanograms per deciliter, which isn't bad for someone my age, but is significantly lower than my normal 900s to low 1000s. And after working with them, I'm back to over 1000. But what mattered more was why. Despite these levels, I was still having trouble gaining muscle mass and recovering the way I expected. This isn't guesswork or generic advice. It's a structured, data-driven process with a physician who interprets the labs and builds a personalized plan. So if you want to identify avoidable issues early so that they don't quietly undermine your performance when it matters most, head to merrickhealth.com and use code JABAL for 10% off. Now, onto the second main pressure shift. Research. Research didn't suddenly matter after step 1 went past fail. It was already increasingly important, but the slope changed dramatically. Look at the NRMP charting outcomes data. In neurosurgery, matched applicants averaged 18.3 research items in 2018. By 2022, that climbed to 25.5. But just over 2 years, from 2022 to 2024, it jumped to 37.4. That's nearly a 12-point increase in half the time. Plastic surgery more than doubled, from 14.2 to 34.7. Orthopedics went from 11.5 to 23.8. Dermatology hit 27.5. This isn't gradual inflation, it's an arms race. When step 1 scores were removed, residency programs didn't suddenly become more holistic. They still needed ways to filter thousands of applications. They had fewer early objective signals, so research output became one of the remaining measurable differentiators. And as a result, incentives shifted. Research became more heavily weighted, and the system began rewarding the countable output of research items, including abstracts, presentations, and publications, over just depth alone. And for those wondering how the recent ERAS changes to things like research is going to affect this in the future, stay tuned because we have some exciting new content that's going to cover exactly that and what you can do to still differentiate yourself. Now keep in mind, these specialties were already in a different tier, but after 2022, the gap, it just widened faster than ever. If you're aiming for one of these fields, the research expectation isn't optional, it's table stakes. Now for context, I applied with more than 60 research items, half of which were publications. And it's not supernatural, it's not because research was my favorite thing to do, I just prioritized research because I understood how the system rewarded it and I built my application around that reality. Once you understand what counts and how to approach it intentionally, output increases. Residency programs aren't reading every paper. They're using research items as proxies for academic engagement and productivity when they need to quickly compare large applicant pools. And yes, residency programs are using algorithms to actually quantify your research. So 2 people that each have 25 research items aren't actually going to be the same in terms of their overall research score. Things like being first versus second author, the impact factor of the journals, whether they are peer-reviewed or not, etc. are all factored into this residency research score. We'll be covering this in more detail in a future video, so subscribe if you want to see that. Now, the problem is that the learning curve isn't obvious, and most students are left to figure it out on their own. It took me years to understand how to do this efficiently and actually get dozens of research items in a single year. So if you want to understand how to build research output strategically and actually curate it for your residency application, the Ultimate Pre-Med and Medical Student Research course covers exactly that. Together with Dr. Dipal Patel's 61 research items and Dr. Sean Anderson's 62 and my 66, we've collectively gathered over 180 research items across different institutions and training paths and specialties. We each used different strategies to get high-quality research onto our CVs, and that research helped open doors to residency. We all matched into the programs we aimed for and into competitive specialties like plastic surgery, radiology, and anesthesiology. Now, the system rewards patterns, not luck. But almost no one teaches those patterns explicitly. That's why we built this course. We break down the different tactics, how to use them, and how to actually leverage research strategically. The goal isn't to turn every student into a full-time lifelong researcher, it's rather to help students understand what actually counts and how to get them the output they need to improve their residency competitiveness and get them into their dream specialty. You can find that link in the description. So, was making step 1 pass-fail a mistake? The original promise was reduced stress, but burnout and anxiety persist because burnout was never primarily about step 1. What actually changed was how students are evaluated, not the competitiveness of residency. There's less clarity on where students stand, fewer objective benchmarks, and less time to adjust once those signals appear. So the real issue is a structural bottleneck. And this gets to the core issue. Competitive things are competitive, and if you change something to pass-fail, that doesn't make the end goal of residency any less competitive. It just changes the metrics by which you play the game. And that's the part that so many people, the majority actually back then, completely misunderstood. But just like what I and a few others predicted, residency didn't become any less competitive when Step 1 went pass-fail. The competition just shifted to different signals, ones that show up later, carry higher stakes, and are harder to recover from. So when we talked about data-backed competitiveness, the most competitive specialties consistently cluster at the top. That's dermatology, plastic surgery, neurosurgery, ENT, and orthopedic surgery. They clearly stand above the rest in terms of applicant pressure, score expectations, and research volume. Other specialties like radiology, radiation oncology, and anesthesiology are also very competitive, but they're not at the same tier as those top 5 when you look at objective match data. Meanwhile, specialties like family medicine, pediatrics, they generally face less intense screening pressure because their supply-demand dynamics just differ fundamentally. This distinction matters because competition in medicine isn't abstract, it's driven by incentives. Where demand far exceeds supply, programs will always rely on hard filters, regardless of whether Step 1 is scored or pass-fail. Programs must filter. Application volume makes a detailed review impossible, and when one signal is removed, others take its place. So, research output carries more weight, and programs lean more heavily on clerkship grades, letters of recommendation, and institutional familiarity to sort applicants at scale. And most importantly, a lackluster Step 2 CK score is now much harder to recover from. Most students self-study Step 2 CK and plateau. The difference between a good score and a great score comes down to someone who can pinpoint your specific gaps and build around them. People think it's just content knowledge, but there's actually 3 pillars to getting a top score. It's your content knowledge, your study strategies, and your test-taking skill. And most people just over-index on that first, the content knowledge. But you have to focus on your study strategies and your test-taking skill as well if you want to get a top score. And if you want to learn more about that approach, and this is the same approach that I used to score almost a 270, then you can find out more details in the link below. So who was hurt most by this change? You'll often hear the argument that Step 1 going pass-fail hurts certain groups more than others, including DO students, IMGs, or students from less well-known schools. There's some truth there, but the reality is more nuanced. At the end of the day, the system didn't stop using exams as a primary filter. It simply shifted which exam counted most. Step 1 lost its numeric score, and Step 2 CK became the dominant testing signal instead. But the bigger shift wasn't only from Step 1 to Step 2, it was the growing importance of research. And again, you've already seen the numbers. Neurosurgery from 25 to more than 37 research items in just 2 years. That's not a gentle trend, that's a spike. And as research output becomes a more heavily weighted signal, students without strong research infrastructure, mentorship, or institutional support are at a disadvantage. And yes, this often is DO, IMG, and students at less competitive medical schools. So if you're not at one of these research-heavy academic centers, it's simply harder to get access to opportunities. But even students at top academic institutions aren't automatically set up for success. Most still don't know how research items are actually counted, how to publish efficiently, or how to intentionally build output rather than just randomly. There's even ways to frame it on your residency application that, again, with the new ERAS changes, you have to be more mindful of to make sure it actually improves your competitiveness and improves the strength of your application rather than being a weak signal that just shows duplicate projects. And that's the real issue. The system increasingly rewards research productivity, but it doesn't teach students how to navigate that system. You just join a lab and hope it works out. But that gap is exactly what we address in the Ultimate Research course, which you can find linked below. So, bottom line, this is what students need to understand about STEP scores and preparing for residency. Take Step 1 seriously, even though it is pass-fail. It's all about finding the right balance, because investing too much of your energy in Step 1 also puts you at a disadvantage, because while you're so focused and over-preparing on Step 1, other students are gaining research experience and getting actual output. So aim for a score that puts you well beyond the danger zone, but don't over-prep at the expense of the rest of your application. Step 1's change to pass-fail didn't erase stress, it just changed how students are filtered. And early clarity was replaced with later, higher-stakes signals. The pressure didn't disappear, it concentrated. Treat Step 2 CK as the primary test score in residency screening. Be intentional with research and start early. Focus on experiences that actually mean something, not just checking boxes. And take the time to understand how the specialties you're considering actually evaluate applicants, including what Step 2 scores are typically expected. And if you're a pre-med or medical student, you can find out exactly where you stand right now for each of the specialties you're interested in. Plug in your stats at specialtypredictor.com to see your odds of matching based on the latest official NRMP data. You can find that right up here.